A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, viewers. I'm Matthias Aufiku, news editor of the Namibian Sun newspaper. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Evening Review Show. Before we get into the matters of the night, let's take a look at tomorrow's headlines. Thank you. Well, for starters, a Rundu mother from the Ndama informal settlement area appears in court for baby dumping. It seems the scourge of baby dumping still continues to grip our society. Also, we have some dam statistics. The country's dams are standing at 84% full. Well, it must have been because of the good rains the past few days. Another headline that you can expect in tomorrow's edition is the e-voucher system that has been launched with the primary aim of driving urban agriculture. Well, we're joined in studio tonight by Ambassador Wilfried Emvula. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Well, Ambassador is the National Governing Council chairperson of the African Peer Review Mechanism. Well, a lot of Namibians might be wondering, what is this APRM? What does it do? What does it entail? And why is there a need for such an organization? Can you probably just give us a rundown, just for the benefit of our viewers, just perhaps to catch up as to what we're talking about when we talk about the African Peer Review Mechanism?
The African Peer Review Mechanism is an organ of the African Union. It was established in 2003 in order to allow African governments to peer learn from themselves. You remember in the olden days, Africa was always at the table of discussions, and it was reviewed by others who would be able to make assessments as to where Africa stands economically and politically. So the African Peer Review Mechanism is a body of the African Union which has been created by African heads of state to learn from each other's experiences. And that is why it is kept at the heads of state level in order for it to make an impact on African governance. It normally encompasses 4 thematic areas: democratic and political governance, corporate governance, economic management and governance, and socio-economic development. So those are the 4 thematic areas that countries normally review themselves, and then teams from the African Continental Secretariat would come to validate whether that assessment was truthful and fair.
Well, some people might be wondering, but for a country such as Namibia, why should we be part of such a setup? How does it benefit us?
A good question, Matthias. And that is actually why it took us so long in order for us to come on board. Namibia only acceded to the African Peer Review Mechanism in 2017. It has taken some time. And I think the fundamental areas were, what do we have to learn from the African setup, African governance, and the rest? And I think at a later stage, President Hage Geingob, when he came into power, he decided that even if we were not having much to benefit from others, we can maybe offer to others what we have gone through and the areas where we are doing well. So that, I think, triggered Namibia to become part of the African Peer Review Mechanism.
Well, that's about 14 years, if my calculations are correct, since 2003.
Yes.
Do you think this perhaps sort of gave off the impression that we don't really want to be involved in some of the continental affairs? Is this one of the reasons why we acceded?
I wouldn't really say so. I was just saying that we had so much to do within, and we thought at our own table, at our own pace, and also hearing from others. Namibia was always a country that has been shining. And as such, we thought we would rather go and push our own programs and didn't see the need to share it with others. But it is also important, when you are in a community of states, a community of people, the neighbor should always be in charge, but would also share with the neighbor.
Yeah.
And as Africans, therefore, we have to learn from each other, learn from each other's experience, and be able to do better every other time.
Yeah. Well, you of course, together with your team, you recently submitted the self-assessment report to the president. Can you maybe just give us a brief summary of what the report contains, and maybe just some of the highlights?
I think that takes me a little bit back in terms of what the Namibian National Governing Council have done since its existence, since 2019 when it was inaugurated by President Hage Geingob. We immediately identified, and this was a new concept under the APRM, to look at critical area of governance that can have an impact on the political forum. We identified youth unemployment as a critical political problem. And therefore, we undertook a strategic review on youth unemployment. That strategic review has been adopted by the African Union in 2020. We came back, we drafted a national plan of action, which has been adopted by Cabinet and is now in the strategies and in the forum of being integrated into the national program or national plan of action and the national development plans, and also in Harambee too. So that was the first thing that we did. After that, in 2020, we started working on the country self-assessment report. Now, the self-assessment is creating a venue whereby we will assess ourselves as a country in those 4 thematic areas, and then be able to open up to the Continental Secretariat of the African Union to come and validate that report. That report brings the country review report that we submitted to the president and that the president submitted to the African Peer Review Mechanism Forum of Heads of State last week.
Yeah. When you say self-assessment, it normally flares up the question of objectivity and independence. This data, when you say it's streamlined into the mainstream governing system of the country, one can't help but wonder how independent and objective is this data that's collected, or is it another case of we just want to show the continent what we want them to see?
I do understand your argument. Yes, in fact, that is the line of operation that has been established. You do a country self-assessment, and when doing that, you need a technical research institute that will be able to do the research in order to be able to bring up a truthful report, self-assessing. And with that, you involve all stakeholders, private sector, civil society, clergy, in terms of governance to the local level and even to the tribal authorities. Now, in doing a self-assessment report, you look at those 4 thematic areas and you engage technical people. In this case, our technical research institution was UNAM, with its professors that are identified to be knowledgeable about those 4 thematic areas: democratic and political governance, economic governance and management, corporate governance, socio-economic development. They then, led by the National Governing Council and the Secretariat, bring up that report, which we call a country self-assessment report. Once we have finished that, we now call upon the Continental Secretariat to come into the country and do a validation. So they have been here last year for 2 months and did a validation on that report, going to various regions, hearing from the stakeholders in the regions how they feel about those points that have been established in the country self-assessment report. Of course, bringing about the report has also gone through the same process. We go to the areas, we go to the regions, we engage stakeholders, we hear what they have got to say, and those are the points that has been integrated into that report.
Yeah.
On the basis of which now the Continental Secretariat comes to validate whether it was indeed truthful, it was factual, it was fair, and of course they will also most probably, because they are outsiders, maybe the stakeholders will open up more in order to give them more than what we have had during our own assessment.
Yeah. So what would you say are some of the social reactions that you got from the stakeholders, especially out in the regions? What are some of the key areas that you can point out?
Some of the key areas that we have picked up, most probably the issue of decentralization, for example, which has been termed by regional or local authorities to be a little bit slow. And also some of them would have understood it to be turned into a devolution of powers.
Yeah.
But our system, of course, indicates clearly that it's a decentralization and it is a process whereby slowly but surely certain aspects of central government authorities will be transferred to regional and down to local authority.
Yeah.
That is just one aspect. The other aspect was the issue of the low execution of our budget. That was also felt that budget has always remained with money in the kitty when they feel that some of the issues were not addressed.
Yeah.
The issue of the marginalized communities that also need to get more attention is one such an issue that would also have come up through the report. Now, these are some of the pointers that one would have expected would definitely be raised by the stakeholders and therefore need attention.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what this process is all about.
Yeah, okay. Since exceeding in 2017, how many reports were formulated? Is this the first one?
Currently, of course, this country review report was our first.
Okay.
When we submitted this report on the forum, Namibia was reviewed together with Nigeria and South Africa, big countries that have acceded to the APRM already in 2003, but theirs were the second generation report.
Yeah.
So ours being first, we are really seen to have done a lot in the short time that we have been members of the APRM. And the Continental Secretariat and the rest of the members of the APRM has really highly commended Namibia on the speed and the engagement that they have taken in the process of the APRM.
Yeah. Well, Ambassador, we have the data. It's been validated. What's the way forward? What do you expect as you and your fellow council members? What do you expect in terms of the recommendations made in those reports? The ball is in government's court now, it seems.
Yes, that is what it is. Government is actually just a leader in this process. And this process is an all-encompassing process. It's a stakeholders process. Even when you look at the setup of the National Governing Council, the members there are drawn from all walks of society, from civil society, from private sector, marginalized communities, people with disabilities. That is how the setup is supposed to be. And therefore, now that this report of the Namibia Review has been adopted by the Forum of Heads of State, we now have got a responsibility to look at those recommendations that are accommodated in this report to transform them into a program of action. Now, this program of action will be the tool that Namibia will use to implement those recommendations. Now, of course, this process of crafting the program of action will also be an all-encompassing process.
Yeah.
We will go and organize stakeholder engagement meetings in all regions and identify those critical areas that are supposed to be brought into the program of action. And then the national program of action will come back to cabinet. Once adopted by cabinet, cabinet would normally give it to the responsibilities of the relevant ministries that will spearhead the process. And then in that program and in the process of doing so, at the end of the day, this program will be put to a forum where all stakeholders will be, and they will then be able to identify certain areas that they will take responsibility of implementing.
Yeah.
So it's not just government's program alone. It's a country program, and it will be expected that all stakeholders will play a role in the implementation for the betterment of our communities.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Well, we go for a short ad break quickly, and we'll be back for the second half of the show, and also just to come wrap it up.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, welcome to another exciting edition.
Well, let me welcome our viewers back from the short ad break. Ambassador, let's continue this conversation. APRM, in the greater scheme of things, of course, you've been all over the world representing Namibia. You've been posted at the UN, France, at the AU, and so on. What are some of the lessons that you think we can draw as a country going forward?
I think this, when you touch on these areas, you touch on multilateralism. Multilateralism is, of course, an open field where you engage various stakeholders in the international platform.
Yeah.
And from there, you would definitely, as a country, stand to benefit. Of course, there are people that have always said, why do we have to belong to this body and the other body and so many bodies? But everybody has got its specific objectives and goals.
Yeah.
And if you want to be part and parcel of that, you should play a role in order to gain also from others.
Yeah.
If we were not members of the UN, for example, we would have been like an isolated island on our own. But what do we benefit from major powers, from other countries at our level and beyond? We can only benefit if we play a role in that area. Now, what of course I have learned, I've been in France, for example, I've been accredited to UNESCO, the FAO, and these are bodies that play a role in education, in agriculture, and other forums. In Addis, of course, you've got the African Union, you've got the Economic Commission for Africa, which is a UN body set to work with Africa in terms of economic programs.
Yeah.
So these are the bodies that you have to be members to in order for us to be able to gain. And that is why we have got representatives there.
Yeah.
Now, coming back, of course, you need to plow back the little skills that you have accumulated all over the place. And I think these are some of the objectives that countries have, and they have to benefit from.
Yeah.
You cannot be on your own and think you will be able to move, you will be able to perform better, unless you compare yourself to others.
Yeah. Of course, when we speak development equity, one could perhaps say that APRM is a mechanism or a tool to ensure that the African states move together, no one is left behind. But then when you compare it, of course, again to your travelings, where you have served as ambassador of the country, what do you think from a continental level? Where are we still lagging behind?
There are quite a number of issues that we as Africans have to work on. We have got policies, proper policies in place. If you go to the African Union, you have got the Constitutive Act, which sets out the objectives, the main objectives and mission of the African Union. Our problem sometimes is transforming those realities that are set up into these documents into action. And of course, when you have to transform them into action, you've got the problem of managing your economy in order to make sure that the resources that you have would benefit the rest of the community. You would have to contribute in terms of your developmental programs so that you would be able to produce just not for yourself but for the rest.
Yeah.
Many of us in Africa are not producing to the level where others can benefit from. We most probably produce in our own interest and even import more in order to complement what we produce.
Yeah.
But then I think also the linkages, both in terms of transport, communication, they are not hooked enough at all levels. Private sector, sometimes the policies are in place, but we are not always at the same level of implementing those programs and policies.
Yeah.
So you would, for example, have a neighbor. Your policies would be in place. Your productions are in place. You produce up to the level where you can export to the next neighbor. But then the issue of borders, the issue of movement of people and goods has not been facilitated enough, because when your traders go to the border, they are being asked certain things that may not be in place on the other side of the border. So these are some of the things, and I think the African Continental Trade Agreement would create this path if we all can work on it in making sure that the necessary policies to govern this aspect has been put in place.
Yeah. Well, this free trade agreement, I'm sure APRM should be one of the central bodies to ensure that this works. What do you think is the role of the mechanism in this regard?
I have, when you look at both our report and that of South Africa and Nigeria that has been submitted currently to the Forum of Heads of State, this aspect appears there. And it appears in the sense that enough should be done in order to make it work. Therefore, it is now for our governments to read along this line and make sure that priorities are given to implement this framework.
Yeah. Just lastly, Ambassador, earlier on you spoke of the feedback from the regions. One of the key issues according to you, was that they feel that when budgets go back, but there are certain projects that are not executed, but there's money going back to Treasury, which also subsequently leads to low implementation of developmental projects. So perhaps now that the report is submitted, what is the role of the APRM now to make sure that going forward, implementation is ensured and recommendations are carried out and they don't just gather dust wherever the report is?
Yeah, exactly. That is, I think, going to be a role of the National Governing Council now. We have been much engaged in translating and formulating the frameworks in terms of these reports. Now that we have created, and once we are done with the creation of the program of action, our role will now be to monitor and supervise the implementation of those recommendations and those aspects that has been raised in the National Plan of Action, both in the sense of the country review report and the National Plan of Action in case of the strategic report on youth unemployment.
Yeah.
So to make sure that the aspects there has been put into the programs and that the programs indeed are translated into bringing about the results that it requires. Because, mind you, we have to give periodic reports to the African Forum of Heads of State of the APRM in order for us to tell, since we adopted the program of action, how far have we gone in the implementation thereof.
Yeah.
So it will be a critical area where we will try to play the role of monitoring and supervision, and of course speak to those that have committed themselves to implementing those aspects of the program of action in order for them to do what they are required to do.
Yeah.
It requires resources, both human and financial, and there are stakeholders that are also playing the role as partners, for example, the Economic Commission for Africa, the Africa Development Bank, that can avail resources that would assist us in the implementation of this process. And of course, the private sector would also come in.
Yeah.
So it's just the coordination aspect thereof in order to enable us to make sure that we have indeed responded to what we have said we need to do.
Yeah. Well, Ambassador Emvula, thank you very much for your time tonight, and we wish you well with your work ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
For your time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Go far with Paratus. Go further with Paratus Fiber. Paratus, offering high-speed, reliable fiber connectivity, starting from only 599 Namibian dollars per month. Unlimit your lifestyle and visit na.paratus.africa for more information.
Always prepared. Paratus.